Welcome to Beyond the Screen, an IONOS podcast, where we share insights and tips to help you scale your business's online presence. Hosting genuine conversations with the best in the web and IT industry and exploring how the IONOS brand can help professionals and customers with their hosting and cloud issues. I'm your host, Joe Nash. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Screen, an IONOS podcast. Today, we're joined by Jeff Johnson on the show, an empathy-driven UX designer and creative director with an impressive portfolio spanning across renowned companies like Dell, IBM, and Microsoft. Currently leading the design initiatives at Alata and Dotted 8, Jeff's expertise extends far beyond creating visually appealing interfaces. He crafts meaningful digital experiences that address both business objectives and user needs effectively. Over the years, Jeff has not only been a pivotal player in designing world-class products, but also an influential leader fostering creativity, innovation, and collaboration in his teams. As an articulate communicator and a visionary designer, Jeff continues to pave the way for UX design that solves problems, backed by extensive research and a commitment to doing good in the world. Jeff, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. After hearing all that, I'm like, who is that guy?
We've had lots of similar reactions to the bio, which I take to mean that we're doing good things in writing.
Yeah. It sounds great.
We'd like to show y'all who you are, hold a mirror up and show that you're all truly awesome. We're very honored to have you with us. And on that note, in terms of reassuring you that bio is indeed yours, let's dive into your rich career path. So as you know, we mentioned a bunch of names there, a bunch of big companies that I'm sure will be familiar to most of our listeners, but obviously now you're at Alata. Could you kick off by telling us a little bit about that journey? We always love to hear, how our guests get to where they were and what's happened, and what drew you to the field of UX design in particular?
Yeah, so I'm gonna start like way back in high school because I think
Perfect.
a lot of like designers might relate to this. But I've always been a creative person. I love to draw. I initially wanted to be a car designer, so I wanted to do industrial design. Yeah. So I applied for RISD. I applied for Pratt. I applied to Parsons School of Design, and I only got into Parsons School of Design. So that was kind of a bummer, but it worked out because Parsons School of Design, I didn't know this at the time, but they're like a world-class design school.
Interesting.
When I got in, they have like a good foundational program where the first 2 years, you kind of just get your hands wet in everything.
Right.
And so I didn't go into it wanting to do UX design. I just wanted to be some kind of designer, maybe hopefully pivot and go back into like industrial design.
Right.
But when I got into it, I really started loving like coding, HTML, CSS. I got into like web design, graphic design, and I was like, wow, this is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And I remember something that I learned that was pivotal to me kind of shifting towards a UX mindset, which was the difference between art and design.
Okay.
So when I think of art, or this is kind of the way they like presented it to us, art is more expressive. You can do whatever you want.
Right.
And if somebody says they don't like it, well, too bad for them. It's not here to like
subjective, right?
Yeah. It's not here to solve a problem for any user.
Right.
Design, there's constraints, and you're trying to solve a problem for a company or a user or a person. And so I think I found myself wanting to help people or help businesses, or I love the challenge of creating something for somebody else and something that's useful for society.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think that's where I kind of felt a shift in my like creative process, where I wanted to do stuff that was design oriented and not just artistic.
Interesting. Fascinating. Yeah. So that kind of like rotation setup is really unusual to hear from, I guess like I'm kind of used to the idea that in education, you kind of like, you pick what you're going to do 20 years from now with absolutely no input or idea. And that's it. You're locked in now for the ride. It's nice they gave you that experience.
Yeah. Parsons was really good at like teaching us foundational stuff and not just focusing on like, here's how to use Photoshop or, a tool. So, so after I graduated from college, I was doing freelance work. And then I finally got my first gig at a company called UBM, which got bought out by a company called Informa. But over there, I did work for IBM, Dell, Microsoft, a lot of big corporations. Awesome. And back then, UX wasn't really like a massive field.
Yeah.
This was probably like 12 years ago. But most people just refer to it as like web design or information architecture, or like we need someone to come in here and make these fonts look pretty, or like mess with the layout.
That was going to be what I was going to ask. So basically, I guess where I come from that was like, it wasn't that UX wasn't happening. It's that, you know, how we describe it and how we think of it as its own thing wasn't necessarily there yet. It was kind of like dispersed in these other job roles or these other specialties, right?
Yeah. And I think the role kind of naturally formed as like digital products became more and more just like everybody was using it all the time. So we just needed people to make them, work better.
Not suck.
Yeah. So at that time I was just like, I'm a web designer, and I found myself doing all these UX activities, creating wireframes, researching the user, creating personas, and no one was like, oh, this is a UX thing. It was just like, oh yeah, you're just a web designer that does this stuff. And then the field kind of, evolved and grew, and then I leaned more into UX. Got a job at Dell. Was a senior designer there. So I did a lot of like front end web design, but also like UI design for like their interactive elements. And then again, freelance for a little bit, but eventually came to Aleda, and it's been great. It's been a great journey.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's super cool. I'm glad you started from the high school element. I think that's a really important part of your journey. I guess to look more, maybe it is part of those early bits, but maybe more on the professional side. How has there been any points throughout that journey that have shaped your approach to UX design now? Like anything that's added to your philosophy or how you think about it, other than obviously the comparison to art, which I think is a really great one.
Yeah, I think for me, what I've found that I enjoy the most and that shaped me the most is the moments where I'm like talking to a stakeholder or maybe talking to a user, and they tell me something about the task that they're trying to do or the problem that they're trying to solve, and I'm able to come up with a solution that like saves them time in their day, or makes their life happier, or like I don't know, just adds like real value to a person or like to society. And so I almost like crave that now, where I'm like, I want to help people. I don't want to create like products that are like harming the world or harming society or the planet, or I really want to do good. So I think that's like a main part of what differentiates me as a designer from everybody else. I'm not just doing stuff to, I don't know, meet business goals. That's a big part of UX design. But I really hope like I can help the end user, and I see myself as an advocate for them.
You must really get to see like some tangible improvements and some real like minute to minute moments of like people's workflows and stuff that like just, make their everyday better in cool ways. That's really neat. Awesome. Perfect. So I mean, let's talk about your current roles. So you're a lead UX designer at Alata and design director at Dotted A, I take to understand. So that's a lot going on. Yeah, I mean, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about like, how those two roles contribute to, and your work on them through that, how you think that UX contributes to the way that digital products are perceived? Do you see, and we're talking about solving people's problems, so I guess you see real tangible impacts of UX at those companies.
Yeah. So a little backstory about Dotted 8. So I started Dotted 8 right out of college, just because jeffjohnson.com was taken. So I got like the most generic, like vanilla name in the world. So it was not available.
I wouldn't call that generic.
Well, it sounds like a weatherman, right? Like Jeff Johnson.
Oh, sorry, I thought you meant Dotted 8. Okay,
No, Dotted 8 is more of like a musical thing.
As someone with a name that apparently sounds generic, I sympathize with that struggle.
There's like a million Jeff Johnsons. But yeah, so I started just like a freelance thing, and it kind of just eventually grew. Like naturally, I just got more freelance work, and I hired my wife as my first employee. She hired more designers. She hired developers, and then eventually I did a contract at Aleda, and they said, you can have your freelancing on the side and still work at Aleda.
So just come here.
This
is the dream like own business trajectory here. This is so cool.
Well, even though I did that like both, I'm not really involved with the day-to-day of Dotted 8 anymore.
It drives itself now.
And my wife hired everyone to like replace me, so
replaced by your wife. That's cold.
So she literally owns like the majority of the business legally and like the day-to-day activities. So it's been great, but I love my job at Aleda. I think I strive, or like I function better in like a 9 to 5 like Aleda type job. So it was good for my mental health too. And my wife loves running the company, so she's been running with that. But speaking to like what we do at Aleda and how we kind of try to solve people's or users' problems, I think what I love about what we're doing at Aleda is the leadership really evangelizes UX and product design to the rest of the company. And we're not just seen as people that make interfaces pretty.
Right.
And I think that was a big shift within UX where like people are like, hey, we need a UX designer, but what they really meant was like, we just need someone to come in and make these screens look a little bit better.
Right.
And I think our leadership really understands that. And I have like an amazing mentor and other like principals above me that really like value UX design.
Yeah.
And because we value that, when we go to a client, we're able to talk to them about it, talk to them about the importance of UX, and they're able to see value too.
Right.
And I think having that leadership value it from the top down is just like so important. And
that's awesome.
Something I've been like really blessed with. Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, now I'm going to put you on the spot and absolutely curse you with making sure that future UX designers who get hired by bosses have a boss that feels that way and understands it. So if you're listening to this, bosses, could you help our audience understand, how you see the importance of UX and how you see it acting as the lifeblood of digital products? Can you get them that perspective that your bosses apparently have?
Yeah. So I think a big part of it is the shift in like technology now. We're using like pre-made components and a lot of the development is already pre-made.
Right.
There's so many resources for architecture. And I think where companies are seeing the most value added is adding a feature or adding or changing the UX flow or changing the way people interact with the product or just saving people time. Like Amazon, like their Prime app is like changed the world where I'm like, I literally don't need to go out anymore. I can literally just press on a button, but
I never need to think to the future to like have things in my house. They'll be there when I need them. Right.
Like, like I feel like a developer or like somebody on the more technical side would have said like, hey, let's make this app better, or let's change the code, or I don't know, let's do something technical with it. But I think a UX person would come and say, hey, can we save time in this person's day?
Right.
And that adds business value, that increases revenue. And so I mean, money talks. I think UX is starting to evolve where it's less about making things look good and feel good, and it's more about saving businesses money and saving customers time. And so that's a big part of UX.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the like looking to e-commerce and time in particular, I think is a very effective one, because we hear non-stop in the e-commerce space about like checkout abandonment and what small percentage of customers actually make it all the way through checkout. And so like a lot of that is friction. If you're carving that time off, you're really helping with that very like bottom line affecting problem, right?
Yeah. Can I give like a little shout out about
please,
like, e-commerce? Yeah. So like there's a company called the Baymard Institute, and they take like the top, I think 200 something e-commerce sites in North America. In terms of like revenue, and they just like research the crap out of it.
Fascinating.
Like how many people are abandoning checkout when there's no like when you don't have to log in, or when you have to log in. How should a credit card field be styled? Like literally like the most like detailed things, and they do like an amazing job. I'm also certified by them, so shouting at myself.
Perfect.
Shameless plug.
That sounds like a cool certification though. That's a nice program to be running.
There's only like 280 people in the world that like have the certification.
Perfect.
So it's like,
and Jeff's one of them.
But if anybody's listening and they're UXer, like definitely go check them out. Look into their certification, because they're doing amazing work.
I feel like if you're going to pick, I worked in payments very briefly, but I feel like if you're going to pick like any like one industry to go and like see UX at work, just looking at a credit card form on a bunch of websites is like a great example of like, hey, let's see some UX touches, like heavy lifting. Especially if you look over time. So we might have just completely sniped this, but my next question was going to be, so we spoke about the importance of UX. What are the risks of not thinking about UX first, or putting UX as an afterthought? Like, what are some of the pitfalls that companies can fall into?
Yeah, that is a good question. I need to think about that for a minute, because it's not like if you don't have a UX designer, your product is doomed to fail, right? But I feel like even though it might not fail, it can get so much better if you involve a UX person from the beginning. And it may not be like not having UX or having UX. It's like when you involve UX.
Right.
Because a lot of people
maturation step, right?
So a lot of people, or traditionally, I think they would like have the business folks do the research of what we're trying to do, or like a product owner would try to figure out like what we're trying to solve. And then when it's time to, again, like do the aesthetics or like make a visually appealing interface, they bring in the UX designer to try to solve that. But I think the shift that we're seeing is UX designers are brought in right at the beginning, to ask stakeholders and users questions right at the beginning. And that, I think, is adding value. So I think it's more about the risk of not having UX at every phase of the project.
Yeah. Maybe risk isn't the right word. Maybe it's like the unrealized benefits, right? Like if you have UX in it earlier, you just get more bang for your buck, right? Like,
yeah. And traditionally, like UX people might just be contractors where they just come in for like a short stint, and then like we literally hand our files to the developer and they're like, they do whatever they want. We don't like really see what's happening. But I think where there's value and where you can avoid risk is having them till the end to continue to like iterate on what's been developed. Because I mean, honestly, most times like developers, they I love developers who I work with like 200 of them.
I mean, you are a developer yourself. We've covered that you wrote code and did web design, right?
But like, you know, they're not as focused on whether it's 5 pixels or 7 pixels, or like whether it's like off white or white. So a lot of times we have to go back in and say like, hey, instead of using this color, like let's tweak it to this because that's actually what we have on the design.
And by that point, they're solving for different problems. And if the UX design is out of the room, you know, there's no one to realign those priorities, right? Like, it just drifts out of vision.
It's good to have like a UX person be like the bad guy to like continue to work on the design.
Perfect. And I guess the other, you know, we've all, well, I suppose especially you have been, you know, like running a consultant company, but you know, I think lots of people have had the experience of like coming into a project after a lot of the decisions are set in stone, and you know, some bad decisions are locked in, and I can really easily see how that would be very, you know, limiting in terms of the UX changes that you can make and the scope of improvements that you can make. So I definitely understand bringing people in earlier. So one of the things you mentioned there was, you know, that you know, there's a shift in UX and you're starting to see these changes. So obviously some parts that are positive, you know, people come into UX, like UX designers coming into projects, you know, at better times. But on the flip side, like, is that, you know, are the changing times bring any challenges? Like, what are the biggest challenges you face in creating impactful UX designs?
I think one of the biggest challenges we're seeing in UX is expecting UX people to know all the different UX roles. And then there's a person that we traditionally think of would just like make the UI better. There's like C-suite level people that are just like chief product officers. And I think partly because of like social media and like all the posts that we see on LinkedIn about like, you got to do this, you got to learn this, you got to update your portfolio to this, I think designers might be trying to get overwhelmed and like stretching themselves thin to be like a master of everything in UX.
It's full stack development all over again.
And some companies expect you to know how to code too. So it's like we're like supposed to be developers and UX designers and researchers and strategists and business consultants. So it's good to know like a little bit of everything, but I think the challenge is maybe the challenge for designers is finding like a place where you feel like your specific skill set is like valued and they don't expect you to, you know everything.
Interesting. Very, very interesting to hear it's, you know, splitting into so many defined roles. I guess that makes total sense. Like, you know, user research is, I guess, a long established tradition in more traditional consumer facing businesses. So it makes sense that it, you know, would be popping up digital sphere as well.
And if you even like think about the type of mindset or the type of person that would want to do UX research, like talk to a person and like really get to know them and empathize with them, might be completely different from like an artist that just wants to make stuff look good, right? So expecting someone to do both is just like a lot of times it doesn't jive.
You know, you saying that reminds me, you know, a lot of the reason, you know, I'm a developer and I code, but like I could never do the sit behind the desk and focus 9 to 5 on writing code thing. I need to be doing like other stuff. I just couldn't do that length of time. But other people, you know, thrive in that environment. And I'm, you know, with any profession, there's that dichotomy of like stuff coming in, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So I guess those are kind of the challenges as you see it now and in the future for the industry as a whole. I want to take a step back to, I guess, like earlier in your career and, entering this space. Obviously, it was evolving a lot of the time, so this might be different to people's experiences now. But like, what were some of the obstacles you encountered in those early stages of breaking into UX design and making this a path that you can choose? And I'm especially expecting this to be fascinating because, like, you started out like freelance from the get-go, so like it sounds like you forged this path like hard.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest challenges for me personally was, and a lot of designers might, or not a lot of people might not relate to this, but for me, I'm naturally like an introvert. So if I'm in a room, like I always prefer to be like a fly on the wall. I'm not the person that's going to like, jump up and raise their hand and like try to get my time to speak. Like I would love to just stay silent, just like absorb everything in. Being a UX person is like almost naturally like the opposite of that. So sure. I'm always almost in like an uncomfortable situation where like to be a good UX person, you have to be able to like speak up. You have to be able to ask questions.
Right.
You have to be able to give an opinion. You have to be able to share a story about like what we think is going to be, beneficial for the user. So all this requires like, being an extrovert.
Sure. And sorry, just breaking for a minute. So the reason you have to do that, that's because of, that advocating for the customer role, like being that voice in the room. Okay.
Yeah. You have to be the voice of UX in the room and talk to, or speak for your users. So like when I first started my career, I was obviously like a junior designer or like a visual designer. I wasn't like a lead designer like I was right now. So I felt like I shouldn't speak because it'd be like out of turn or like I'd be talking over like a VP or somebody. But internally I'd be like, oh, that's completely wrong. Like we should definitely change that. But I just didn't speak up. And I think if you're in the space, you just got to challenge yourself to like speak up and say, okay, like I'm here in this room I'm here in this room for a reason. I need to like add value to the conversation. And they brought me in as a UX person. So, I gotta share what I know.
Yeah.
And that was like a big challenge for me.
Yeah, that does sound like a big challenge. And I know this might be a too personal question. Has having to do that like shifted you towards more extrovert tendencies, or is it more that like, hey, I'm on and I'm performing, and after this I'm going to be really drained for the day, but I've done my extrovert bit for the day?
I think there is like an element to that where like at the end of the day I'm a little bit drained from having to talk a lot.
Right.
But also as I've done it more, I've realized that I do know a lot or what I'm talking about.
Right.
And
I imagine that's energizing and helps you do it, right?
They're like, oh wow, thank you so much for saying that, or like providing that insight, because this is really helpful for our business, or this is going to help our users a lot. And so when you hear stuff like that, when you get feedback like that, it just like pushes you to keep doing it. So
that's awesome.
I would encourage designers to just like speak up and try it. You'll be surprised at how much value you can add.
And the strength of your knowledge. People definitely consistently underappreciate what it is that they actually know, especially even at early stages of their career. So I think that's a really great tip. Switching back to a little bit to, I guess, of like breaking down UX for our audience. I feel like every profession has its kind of like pet concept or word that gets thrown around a lot when talking about what it is that person does. And for UX, I think one of them is definitely empathy. We see the word empathy get thrown around a lot. Could you tell us a little bit about, why empathy is so important for UX designers?
Yeah, I'll share why it's important, and then I'll give you like a little example too. Cool. So I feel like to really create a good user experience or like a good path for a journey, you have to put yourself in the user's shoe and try to feel what they're feeling. And if you don't do that, you're going to default to just doing what's the easiest design or what's like the quickest way to get your task done for that day. And so by really thinking, okay, like what does this person really need? Like, how can I make his life easier? How can I remove pain points from his journey? That's when you get to like a good UX, if that makes sense. Because by default, you'll just literally do what you think is going to save you time and going to make your boss happy or make the business happy. But to empathize with the user is crucial. So one example that I'll share about that is I can't share the client name, but
of course,
there was a user experience within a physical space that I had to design. And so part of the scenario is people were walking in a line and they would get their barcode scanned, like physically scanned.
Yeah.
And the person scanning the barcode was the person that I was designing this experience for.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked them like, hey, how far is the barcode scanner from the screen that you're looking at? And they said it's about like 20 feet. And I said,
what?
Okay, so like, do you have trouble seeing the screen or like seeing the number that you just scanned? And they're like, absolutely. Like, it's almost always way too small for me.
Yeah.
And so they'd have to literally scan, like sometimes walk over and check, walk back, and they have to do this like for like 100 people every day.
Right.
So literally by just asking that question, thinking about like, okay, how can I make this person's life easier?
Right.
Empathizing with them, I increased the font size by like 10 pixels.
Yeah.
And it changed, like it probably added like an hour to their day, you know, just like from not having to walk back and forth. They could just sit on a chair and just like scan it and have the next person come over.
That's incredible. The fact it got that far where like that physical space was designed where that was the case is yeah.
Yeah. There was a lot of like
UX designers earlier in the room.
Yeah. And then another thing was like they had to compare like what they scanned to what they previously scanned. So the next person line.
Yeah.
And so just by having the two screens like side by side, changed the game. Yeah. So like little things like that.
Yeah. So this is a bit of a wild card question. One of the, I guess, like things we hear from related disciplines a lot, especially I guess like product fields, but also I guess to a limited extent, you know, designers, is that the user doesn't always necessarily know what it is they need or they want.
Yes.
How do you experience that, you know, yourself as your UX designer, but also how do you manage? Is there any truth in that? Like, how have you encountered that phrase, and how do you deal with that being so user and empathy driven?
I mean, Apple, I think, is like the best example of that, where like they just kept removing buttons from their phone. You're like, how am I going to do anything?
And also obviously the early whole thing about Steve Jobs hating the pen tablet, like the pen stylus or whatever. Yeah.
So like, I mean, if you've seen like the documentary or like seen anything about Apple, you know, like they're not afraid to like make bold decisions or like change the way we interact with things. And now it's like, why would I want a button on my physical phone? Like that's ridiculous. We take as much information as we can from the user, or like gather as much data as we can, do interviews, do all the research activities that we can, but we don't let the user dictate the user experience. We use that to kind of dissect it and see if we can add value from it. Excellent. But we're not like, okay, the user said it, we have to do it.
The user's not the UX designer. They're providing the data, right? And that makes sense.
And a lot of times they don't know like the technical things, or like obviously you're a developer, so you know, like they don't know how much it would cost to like implement something, or like how much like lag or like load time it would take to do something like this, or like, so you can't just like blindly take what the user says and just like implement it. You always have to like see for yourself, like this is actually going to help. Another thing is like there's UX patterns, or like common UX patterns. So people are just used to doing things a certain way, and so they expect other apps and products
to follow that pattern.
So if one person changes it, at first it's going to be like, whoa, like a fish out of water, like how do I navigate this thing? But after a while you're like, oh my gosh, this actually works like so much better, and then you can't go back.
And then does that then become a new UX pattern, or do they like okay, awesome.
I mean the iPhone is like a great example of that, right?
Okay, that's probably two in the ways. Like how do you keep up with what the current UX patterns are? Is this just something you know, or is this part of is there like a UX pattern Bible that all the UX designers have on their desk? Like how does that work?
I mean, I think social media is actually a great way to keep up with all that stuff, because there's always people posting about new UX patterns, or like new things coming out in technology. LinkedIn is a great resource. There's a lot of good like LinkedIn groups. I mean, you could read books, but obviously like they don't stay up to date. I think for me, as I've done UX more and more, I've just began to notice things in the world as I'm interacting with them. I'll be like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't have to, enter my credit card information that time. They just already automatically knew it. Or like I was on Uber Eats the other day and I ordered something and they had my previous order already like there, and they just said like, hey, do you want to order this again? I was like, thank you. Like that is what I want to order again. And I was like, I expect this now from every like food ordering app. Like I want them to know what I previously ordered, so I can just click a button and press it again.
Fascinating.
And then another example is like normally on like e-commerce sites, like they'll ask you to fill out like the state or like the country, the city, all that stuff. But now we're seeing that like you can just put your zip code first for the user, and then it autofills everything for you.
Right.
Saves,
you just choose the house number or whatever, right? Like,
yeah. So and then like now I'm like, oh, why are we not doing this everywhere? So it's just about like paying attention to like what happens in your everyday life. Obviously, like all UX designers are using technology, so be aware of what's happening out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Yeah. So I guess to flip over entirely, so we've been talking about, you know, focusing on the user, the importance of empathy. You've mentioned a couple of times, you know, the fact that UX is also really good for the business, and you know, there's a bit of a balancing out there between prioritizing user needs and prioritizing business needs. You know, even in some of the examples we've been talking about, you know, there are examples in many a digital application where the users, what's good for the user in such, you know, especially in regards to speed and getting off that platform and somewhere else, isn't necessarily what the business wants. So how do you, you know, as a UX designer, go about walking that tightrope and keeping that balance?
Yeah. And this is probably a mistake I made early on in my career, where I thought like, I'm only here for the user. And I'm like, I almost disregarded the business side of it completely, or like the business goals. I'm like, if I make this user experience amazing, like it'll obviously help the user,
right?
But it's not helping the company that I'm working for.
Sure.
So I think it's important to advocate for the user and to empathize and to present all your findings to the business and say, hey, I think this is what the user needs.
Right.
And obviously their job is to make money and to you know, increase profits from the design or from the product. So they'll push back a lot of times. And I think instead of like seeing it as like a conflict of interest, seeing it as a way to create like digital products that work, but also are sustainable to the business.
Right.
So I think if you go into a company and you're just always, you know, like disregarding the business goals or not thinking about them, you're doing a disservice to yourself as a designer, because as a designer, you're there to solve a problem, not just for the user, but also for the business.
Sure.
And so I think that's something that UX designers just have to keep in mind, and finding that balance is always key. But as long as you're presenting your or advocating for your user, the business will naturally just like push back and advocate for the business. But yeah, you just have to kind of find that balance.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Like, yeah, that journey is fascinating. It's particularly fascinating because I think a similar thing. I think there's another role called developer relations. I've definitely, you know, people go through a similar journey where they're like, hey, I'm here to advocate for developers, and then they realize that actually, like, oh, you know, there's something here if the business is not served. Yeah, fascinating to hear you go through that same journey. Kind of following on from that. So, you know, you spoke about Apple and Apple's approach to UX, and you know, that's a poignant example because when people think of Apple as a brand, they often think of, you know, these things, these like ways they broke or redefined design. Can you talk a little bit about how UX and a company's UX, you know, works to build that image, that brand's image, and defines, you know, their relationship with their customers?
With UX design, one of the things that's kind of changing and evolving with it is we're seeing the people in branding and marketing work with UX designers to figure out like, how does the UX or the experience of this app or product inform users about who we are as a company. And so, like we said, Apple, like when I think of Apple, because they have such a clean interface and like everything is, I wouldn't say minimalistic, but it's not cluttered. It's easy to navigate. I have an association of their company being for the user. And for like everyday people almost.
Yeah.
Whereas like Microsoft, I feel like they're trying to be for everybody. They're trying to design for every single person in the world. With their pricing too, obviously. But because of that, it feels like they're trying to do too much in their interfaces.
Sure.
Whereas like Apple's like, no, we're not going to give you all those options. We're not going to let you do all those things. We're going to keep it to just these few, you know, tasks that you need to do. We're going to remove all the buttons, less options, but we really think this is what's best for you. And you might not like it, but you can go buy another product.
Right. Sure. Yeah. Something that really speaks to that is the minute you said like Microsoft trying to design for everyone, my head was just filled with the really clear mental image of the ribbon UI, like when they made that big UI transition in all the Office products, and now it's like a bunch of mismatched icon sizes and there's hundreds of them and there's no categories. Just like PTSD flashbacks the minute you said that. Which I think you're spot on. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I feel like Apple, this sounds like cheesy, but I feel like they really care about me or my user experience.
Sure. They're willing to be opinionated, and that's like they recognize that I don't know what's best, and that's what I need.
Like Apple's like I'm a dad of like 2 kids. Apple is like that parent where they're like a little bit more strict, and they're like, no, you don't know what's good for you.
Sure.
I really love you and I want to take care of you, so here's the best experience for you. And Microsoft is like that parent that's like, you can do whatever you want. Or like figure it out. You're just like, be a free spirit. Everyone's just like doing their own thing on their like Microsoft laptops, like hacking it, creating their own like computers and like but I mean, I think that's a great comparison. Like that particular like comparison between those two is a great point, because it comes back to, like that brand perception of Microsoft. The Apple brand perception works for you, especially right now where you are in your life and whatever, but that brand perception of Microsoft is like very appealing to a whole other groups of people, right? And it's like not everyone can get away with being, the stern parent who takes the toys away, right? Like some people need to be the cool parent. Like absolutely. I went off on a little tangent, but to kind of get back to get back to like the way we perceive a company, because of that, like I perceive certain companies as like higher quality based on their user experience that they provide.
Right.
And I think we do that naturally too. Like when we see a website that's like clean,
right,
minimalistic, or
feels like it's been made recently.
Or like, I mean, recently I was shopping at like I was trying to find like new diapers for my kid, and I forgot the name of the company, and I don't know if I should say it either, but
this is not a sponsored segment.
Their website was like so beautiful. I didn't even look at like the specs of the diaper, but it was just like all these clean fonts and like these like off-white soft like colors and like these pops of blue, and it's like they had this like parallax effect going.
Right.
And honestly, I could probably find a better diaper on like Amazon or like there might be a better one at Walmart. But like from the user experience and just from like the way they presented themselves throughout that whole like checkout flow, I was like, oh my gosh, this diaper has to be amazing. I was like, you know what? Maybe I should go back and actually like check what's like happening with these diapers, like if they're actually better than the ones I have. But we perceive good UX as like a good product, or like they took the time to like make this amazing website or this product, and so whatever they're selling or whatever they're offering must be
great,
or like high quality too. So
I mean, I don't have a kid, and that description of that website made me want to go buy some diapers, so I can definitely see how that works. And another place I think you see that, actually, there's like, I guess I perceive it as lots of more traditional businesses suddenly have websites that look like tech startups, but like the mattress companies are a big one. Like, all these like in a box mattresses, you go to those websites, you're like, this is like a SaaS product, this is like a fancy tech startup, but it's a mattress.
And the way they sell it too, it's like it could literally change your experience, like your life. You're sleeping like 8 hours a day, like a third of your life. And they have all these like funny people, all these funny videos. They're dropping like random objects on their mattresses. And the mattress could be garbage, and you wouldn't even know, because it's like, wow,
the UX to get you there has been great. Awesome. Well, we are coming up to time, so I guess I want to end on asking you, what are you excited about for the future of UX? We've spoken about a lot of trends and a lot of the evolution. Like, what's coming in the future that is keeping you hanging around?
I think one of the main things that I'm excited about is seeing like C-suite level people come from like a design background. And I haven't seen much of it yet. But
it's
like the role like chief product officer is like slowly becoming a thing. VP of design, it's like becoming more common. And so I think like companies are starting to realize like, hey, we need someone that's just like focused on this. And also like companies are valuing UX more, and just like I said in the beginning, like introducing it at the beginning of a project instead of like just at one segment, but throughout the whole product life cycle. So just seeing more value in design through companies.
Awesome. Yeah. Perfect. I think that's a great note to end on. Jeff, thank you so much. It's been a blast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Beyond the Screen, an IONOS podcast. To find out more about IONOS and how we're the go-to source for cutting-edge solutions in web development, visit ionos.com and then make sure to search for IONOS in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Don't forget to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at IONOS, thanks for listening.